You can hear the shuffle of sandals on marble. The summer heat presses down on stone columns older than empires. Inside the sanctuary, she kneels, hands clasped, breathing prayers to a goddess who has protected fugitives for centuries. Outside, the sound grows louder, not pilgrims, but soldiers. Their bronze armor catches the afternoon light. As they cross the threshold, no army has dared violate in living memory. The woman in royal purple knows what comes next. She has been waiting. This is Ephesus 41 BCE. The woman is Arsinoe, sister to Cleopatra VII. And what happens in the next hour will be so shocking that 3 separate historians will record it, each one struggling to explain how Rome could allow such an act. But here's the thing: Rome didn't just allow it. Rome ordered it. I'm still amazed that stories like this one reach people everywhere. If you're listening from somewhere in the world right now, drop a comment. I genuinely want to know how far these forgotten voices travel. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus wasn't just sacred, it was legally untouchable. For generations, anyone who reached its inner sanctuary criminal, debtor, or fleeing royal gained absolute protection under Greek religious law. Roman officials had honored this for decades, until today, and the man who gave the order to break that protection wasn't some minor governor. It was Marcus Antonius Mark, Antony, one of the 3 most powerful men in the Roman world. The woman who convinced him to do it was Cleopatra, the queen who had already survived 2 civil wars, a brother who tried to kill her, and Julius Caesar's assassination. Now she needed one more threat eliminated. But Arsinoe wasn't just a threat. She was Cleopatra's younger sister, and once briefly, she had been queen of Egypt too. It started when their father died in 51 BCE. Ptolemy XII left behind 4 children and a kingdom drowning in debt to Rome. Cleopatra, 18 years old, became co-ruler with her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII, in the tradition of Egyptian royal marriages that made modern people uncomfortable but kept power consolidated. It didn't last. Within 3 years, Cleopatra was in exile. Her brother's advisors had seized control of Alexandria, and civil war was tearing the wealthiest kingdom in the Mediterranean apart. That's when Julius Caesar arrived, chasing his rival Pompey, and found himself in the middle of a sibling war that would reshape history. Arsinoe was 15. She did something no one expected. While Cleopatra seduced Caesar and Ptolemy, the 13th rallied his army, Arsinoe escaped the palace, reached the Egyptian military commanders camped outside Alexandria, and declared herself queen. Not co-ruler, not regent, queen. Coins were minted with her face and title. Troops swore loyalty to her. For a few electric months in 48 BCE, there were 3 Ptolemies claiming Egypt's throne simultaneously, and the teenage girl had an army. Caesar's war commentaries mention her dismissively, a footnote to his grander campaign, but the coins survive. Archaeologists have found them in hoards across Asia Minor, small silver pieces bearing her diademed portrait and the royal Ptolemaic insignia. She wasn't playing at power, she seized it. Then Caesar's legions crushed the Egyptian forces. Her brother drowned in the Nile trying to escape, and Arsinoe was dragged to Rome in chains. Here's where it gets strange. Caesar paraded her through the streets during his triumph in 46 BC, either ultimate humiliation for a captured enemy. Roman crowds lined the Via Sacra to see barbarian kings and defeated generals hauled in golden chains. Before being strangled in the Tullianum prison, it was tradition. It was expected. It was how triumph worked. But when Arsinoe passed, something happened that rattled Caesar. Plutarch records it with unusual precision. The crowd went silent. then began to weep. This teenage girl, exhausted and shackled, moved the notoriously bloodthirsty Roman mob to pity. They shouted for Caesar to spare her, and he did. He let her live, exiled her to Ephesus, far from Egypt, far from politics, to live out her days in the sanctuary of Artemis where she could cause no harm. It should have been mercy. It became a death sentence, just delayed by 7 years, because Cleopatra never forgot. Cleopatra returned to Egypt as its sole ruler, with Caesar's backing, and soon his son. She consolidated power with surgical precision, granting land to loyalists, installing her own priests in temples, erasing rival claims from official records. Papyrus documents from the period, the dry bureaucratic tax receipts and land grants stored in Egyptian administrative archives, reveal the meticulous work of securing a throne. Every priesthood, every trade monopoly, every grain shipment went through officials who owed her everything. But administrative control wasn't enough, not while Arsinoe lived. Because in the Hellenistic world, royal sisters were never just family. They were rival claimants. Arsinoe had minted coins. She had commanded armies. She had been acclaimed queen by Egyptian soldiers and Alexandrian crowds. As long as she breathed, someone could rally behind her name. Some ambitious general, some Roman politician looking for leverage, some faction tired of Cleopatra's rule. The precedent was everywhere. Ptolemaic history was written in the blood of siblings who underestimated each other. So Arsinoe stayed in Ephesus, living under the temple's protection, probably believing she was safe. The Artemisian wasn't just any sanctuary. It was one of the 7 wonders of the world, a sprawling marble complex where Greek law and divine protection intersected. Inscriptions carved into its columns declared asylum rights that even Persian kings had respected. Refugees, criminals, deposed rulers, they all found safety there. The city of Ephesus built its identity around being a haven. For 6 years, Arsinoe lived there. We don't know what her days looked like. Did she practice rituals for Artemis? Did she read? Did she watch ships come and go from the harbor and wonder if any brought news from Egypt? The sources are silent on her interior life, which might be the cruelest eraser of all. Then, in 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was assassinated. Rome collapsed into civil war. Cleopatra's protector was gone. The teenage son she had with Caesar would never hold power in Rome. Everything was in play again, and the man who emerged to control Rome's eastern provinces, the man who would decide the fate of kings and cities, from Greece to Syria, was Marcus Antonius. Antony and Cleopatra met in 41 BCE at Tarsus. The descriptions of that meeting have been romanticized into legend. Cleopatra arriving on a golden barge dressed as Venus Antony, captivated. But strip away the poetry, and what you see is a negotiation between 2 ruthlessly pragmatic politicians. Antony needed Egypt's wealth to fund his campaigns. Cleopatra needed Rome's military power to secure her throne permanently. They made a deal. Part of that deal was Arsinoe. Cleopatra didn't ask Antony to arrest a criminal or execute a traitor. She asked him to kill her sister, a woman living in sanctuary protected by laws older than Rome. And Antony agreed. Maybe he believed Cleopatra's argument that Arsinoe posed a strategic threat. Maybe he simply didn't care about Greek religious sensibilities. Maybe he was already so entangled with Cleopatra that her enemies became his by default. We know from Plutarch that Cleopatra was present when the decision was made. She may have written the order herself. The soldiers came in summer. They crossed the temple threshold, past priests who had no authority to stop them, into the inner sanctuary, where Arsinoe had been living. Cassius Dio, writing 250 years later, but pulling from contemporary sources, describes the scene with clinical precision. She was dragged from the temple and executed on its steps, not in secret, not quietly, publicly, as a message. Greek sanctuaries had been violated before in desperate wars, moments of total breakdown. But this wasn't war. This was policy. A Roman commander, operating at the height of his power, with full legal authority, ordering his men to ignore centuries of religious law because a foreign queen asked him to, and he did it in one of the most famous temples in the ancient world, in front of a city that had bet its identity on protecting the defenseless. Ephesus recorded nothing, no civic decree of protest, no inscription condemning the act. The city's public records, usually meticulous about documenting honors and complaints, are silent. Archaeologists have combed through the layers of that period votive offerings. Construction debris, ash from ritual fires, and found nothing that marks the moment. The city swallowed the violation and moved on, because what choice did it have? Complain to Rome. Antony controlled 3 legions in the region. But the historians remembered Plutarch, writing 150 years later, uses the episode as evidence of Antony's moral decline. His willingness to betray Roman values for Cleopatra's influence, Appian includes it in his catalog of Civil War atrocities, the moments when law gave way to raw power. Cassius Dio treats it as a symptom of the chaos that would lead to Actium and Augustus. All 3 agree on the basic facts, which is rare for ancient sources. They all note the location, the violation of sanctuary, and Cleopatra's role. They want readers to be shocked, and then they move on. Because Arsinoe, despite briefly being a queen, despite commanding armies and minting coins and surviving Julius Caesar, becomes a footnote. Not because she wasn't important, because Cleopatra won. Winning meant more than surviving. It meant controlling the archive. After Actium, when Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra and annexed Egypt as a Roman province, a systematic erasure began. Statues of Cleopatra's rivals were pulled down. Names were chiseled off temple inscriptions. Coins were melted for their metal. Papyrus records listing competing royal claims were destroyed or buried in administrative archives where no one would look. Archaeologists call this damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memoriand. Its traces are visible across Egypt. Relief carvings in temples where a second royal cartouche has been carefully gouged out. Statue bases where the dedicatory inscription has been replaced. The physical destruction matches the textual silence. Modern scholars have tried to reconstruct Arsinoe through fragments. A coin here, a mention in a letter there, forensic analysis of skeletal remains found in a tomb at Ephesus that might be hers, though the identification is disputed. The skeleton belonged to a young woman, late teens or early 20s, and isotope analysis of her bones suggests she grew up in the Nile Delta region. The skull shows signs of trauma, but there's no inscription, no marker, nothing definitive. Even her body is uncertain. What's certain is the pattern. Cleopatra systematically removed rivals from both life and memory. Her younger brother Ptolemy XIV, who had been her co-ruler after Caesar, installed them together. Died suddenly in 44 BCE of mysterious causes the same year Caesar was assassinated. Cleopatra named her infant son by Caesar as Coroller instead, another sibling gone. Arsinoe in 41 BCE, by the time Cleopatra consolidated power, no other Ptolemy remained to challenge her. And then Octavian came, and Cleopatra made her final miscalculation. Antony lost at Actium, Egypt fell. Cleopatra chose the asp, an eternal legend. Antony fell on his sword. Their children were paraded through Rome the way Arsinoe once had been, though without the crowd's pity. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, became Rome's first emperor, and the memory of Arsinoe, already erased by Cleopatra, stayed erased under Roman imperial narratives that needed Cleopatra to be Egypt's last queen dangerous, seductive, tragic. A rival sister queen murdered in a sanctuary didn't fit that story. So she vanished. Except she didn't, not completely. Because Plutarch wrote it down. Dio wrote it down. Appian wrote it down. They couldn't undo the act, but they could name it. And in naming it, preserved the shock of what happened. The violation of Artemis's sanctuary at Ephesus became a marker in Roman moral history, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Later, emperors would publicly honor Greek sanctuaries as propaganda to prove they weren't like Antony. The act became infamous even as the victim was forgotten. We don't know if Arsinoe screamed. We don't know if she begged Artemis for protection or faced her executioners in defiant silence. We don't know if the priests wept or if Ephesus's citizens watched from a distance, afraid to intervene. The sources don't record those details, perhaps because the witnesses couldn't bear to, or perhaps because no one asked them. What we know is the outcome. A sister erased, a sanctuary violated, a city silenced, a queen who eliminated every rival and still lost everything in the end. And in the ruins of the Artemision today, tourists walk past column drums and broken foundations, reading plaques about architectural history and religious practice. Most never hear Arsinoe's name. She remains what Cleopatra intended, absent from the story, a gap in the record where a queen used to be. But the gap itself tells a story about how power writes history, about the cost of survival in a world where family was the most dangerous enemy, about a woman who, for one brief moment, was queen and then spent the rest of her short life waiting in a temple that couldn't save her. The soldiers left the sanctuary the way they came. The priests cleaned the steps. Ephesus negotiated its relationship with Rome, and the memory of what mercy looked like Julius Caesar weeping Roman crowds. A teenage girl in chains faded into something harder to name. Not mercy at all, just a longer road to the same ending.